It may come as a surprise to some of you that imposter syndrome shows up everywhere in higher education, from new faculty navigating tenure expectations to seasoned administrators stepping into expanded leadership roles. After all, imposter syndrome thrives in environments like higher ed that are built on achievement, comparison, and constant evaluation. In today's episode, we're exploring how imposter syndrome uniquely affects faculty and staff at colleges and universities and what it means for us as coaches who support them. We'll also dig into the cultural and institutional factors that fuel self-doubt, how imposter thoughts can quietly undermine leadership and well-being, and some practical coaching approaches that help clients move from questioning their legitimacy to owning their expertise and impact. Hello, I'm Tim Jansa, a leadership and organizational development coach and your host for Coaching in Higher Education, the go-to podcast for coaching professionals and those interested in coaching at colleges and universities. My guest today is Dr. AJ Lauer, a dear friend and coaching colleague and nationally recognized expert on imposter syndrome and author of My Monster Mungo, a story about imposter syndrome. Through her work, AJ has established herself as a sought-after speaker, coach, and workshop facilitator in the field of workforce development, especially around imposter syndrome. And she has worked in higher education for more than 15 years. Welcome to the podcast, AJ, and thank you so much for taking time to have this conversation today.
Hey, Tim, it's so good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
So, AJ, for me, even after all those years working with highly accomplished faculty and staff, I'm still amazed at how many of them suffer from feelings of being an imposter. And to be frank, I feel like this has happened to me on many occasions as well. So the topic is somewhat personal to me. How did you come to focus your work on imposter syndrome?
It was actually almost an accident, if you can believe it. I mean, so much in what we get interested in is just a right conversation at the right time, right? So I was out to lunch with my friend Katie, and she was telling me about a situation that she had at work. She said, I was in this meeting and all of a sudden my imposter monster showed up, and, she went on to tell the rest of the story. And I followed up with her and we finished the conversation. I said, Katie, I need to backtrack a little bit because you said something really interesting earlier and I'm curious about it. And I asked her what she meant by the imposter monster thing. And she said, well, I've never really been comfortable with this imposter syndrome term because every time I feel like an imposter, it's not about me. It's typically about the environment that I'm in. And so I started to call it my imposter monster just because that's easy to remember. And I started to explain to her some of the psychology behind what was so neat about her personifying her imposter experiences as this monster that showed up at certain times. And when I started my business about 6 months later, I reached out to her and I said, hey, that imposter monster thing you said, I looked it up on the internet. People do use it around. So it's not necessarily your idea, but do you mind if I run with it? And she said, absolutely not. Go for it. So that's kind of how I got into it.
When you think about imposter syndrome, is it something that you also have struggled with? And especially in the context of higher education, how do you even define it? What are some typical ways the imposter monster, let's just call it that, shows up in work?
So I started my early career in the student affairs side of the house. My first full-time job was as a residence hall director at the University of Illinois. And a little bit of background about me is that I grew up in a lower class, blue collar household. So growing up, nobody in my house had a college degree, but education was always really emphasized. Hey, this is going to be awesome. You're going to grow and become better and make more money and more stable than we have always been. Kind of that American dream situation. When I got my master's degree and then started working professionally in the university setting, I had incredible imposter syndrome every single day. I did not know what I was supposed to wear. I didn't know what the proper ways to interact with faculty or staff were. I'd experienced it as a student, but that's very different than being on the same plane. And so I absolutely have experienced imposter syndrome at various points in my career, but especially in those early years working in the university. And I think that's really common in higher education because we have this American dream idea about getting educated and building yourself up and, the bootstraps and all of that. And so a lot of folks who come into higher education actually come into it from backgrounds where they didn't learn how to exist within that world from their family or their growing up context. So, for many of us, that is a reality of our experience of working full time in higher ed.
So when you think back to your own experience feeling the imposter monster looking over your shoulder, how do you see now in your work with clients imposter syndrome show up at work? What are some of those indicators that you see?
So there's some really great research on imposter syndrome that's done by Dr. Valerie Young. And she talks about kind of the 5 basic ways that we show up as imposters in our everyday lives. So one of them is the overachiever or the superhuman, the person who is juggling everything for everyone all the time. One is the perfectionist, and the perfectionist is the person who has to be perfect all the time. We have experts who are like the knowledge version of the perfectionist. So they have to know everything about everything all the time. We have the natural geniuses, who are folks who have always had an easy time learning things or doing things right away on the first try. And the last one is the soloist. And the soloist is the person who believes that they need to do everything on their own. And the key to all of these, the overarching umbrella concept that links all of these types, is this idea of what it means to be competent in a certain situation. So for our perfectionists, competence means 110% perfect all the time. So in a client, you may hear, oh, I did this presentation to the board and I made one tiny mistake and I'm going to lose my job. Or for our superhumans, and we often see superhumans in people who have minoritized identities, women, people of color, especially in universities, where we are expected to not only do our academic work, but we also have this emotional load that we're taking on for our colleagues and for students. We see that superhuman type. We have to keep all the balls in the air. We have to be everything to everyone and support everybody, often to the detriment of ourselves. And so you'll see people feeling overwhelmed or burned out or overstimulated because they can't keep up with all of these things that they've taken on.
Please pardon the interruption. This is your friendly reminder that if you're enjoying today's episode, to please click like and to subscribe to the podcast. Your support is really important to us. Also, please check out the companion website, higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast. Thanks so much. And now back to the episode. You know, those 5 categories, a couple of them certainly speak to me and my own personal experience. I think the perfectionist is one of them. The other one that you mentioned is the expert who knows everything or thinks they know everything. I've fallen into that trap many times. And it wasn't that I truly thought that I knew everything. It was putting on a facade and pretending that like I was, because if somebody asked you a question and you didn't have an answer for it, or they said, well, have you heard of such and such author or research? Of course, the answer is yes, of course I have. Well, I can't remember exactly. But
Yeah.
why is that? Because there's so much identity, I think, for academics rolled into their feeling of competence that if you would admit that you don't know something, it gnaws at your sense of self. What specific behaviors, when you look at these different categories, do you see in clients? Because I know some clients might come to you and say, well, my imposter syndrome, my imposter monster, whatever, rears its ugly head. But some may not say that, or in the trajectory of an engagement, they may not quite feel comfortable enough or safe enough to be admitting this. What are you looking out for?
Well, we're looking for moments where their expectation of what it means to be competent in a certain situation maybe is up here and they're not meeting those expectations and they're beating themselves up about it. And so, the expert is a fabulous example for higher education, right? Often what we do is we promote people from being experts in their fields to being the department chair, the dean, taking on these other leadership roles that don't necessarily have anything to do with the research that they're really competent at. And so that person may come in and be like, I'm not good at this administrative stuff. I don't know what to do with the people. I want to get back to my data. Often it comes up as that, rather than I feel like an imposter because I'm just a researcher and now I'm expected to do these leadership things. It shows up more as kind of a longing to go back to the area that they are competent in, or that expression of everybody else has this qualification or everybody else can do this and I can't do this. I don't fit in. That gap is what you're looking for.
Have you also seen the case where some of these new burgeoning leaders who haven't really, especially those who emerge from the faculty who haven't received any real leadership training, that they kind of swing the other way and become almost dictatorial or borderline aggressive, where they cannot stand being criticized in any way or even having people wanting to give them friendly advice? Is that something you've seen as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I talk a lot about imposter syndrome or your imposter monster as being a defensive mechanism rather than, we often think about it as, oh, I had imposter syndrome. And so I just had to run away. If you think about what that imposter impression is trying to protect you from, you can understand why you are feeling that way, why are you acting that way, and more importantly, how to handle your nervous system to keep it calm so that you don't let that monster take over and become overbearing and lash out at other people. So by kind of naming this monster and saying, this is my imposter monster, for those of you who are watching online, you can see my monster behind me. His name is Borscht. He's very cute now, but when we met, he had fangs and claws and he was really unfriendly. And that was because he had always been in protector mode. He was trying to keep me from feeling like I didn't belong all the time. Typically, protectors are not warm and fuzzy. They are those really intense places. And so when we see people who are lashing out or being super micromanaging, oftentimes that's a sign that they're letting their monster run the show rather than understanding why they're feeling this way and coming at their behaviors from a more centered place.
So to wrap up this idea of competence, what is it then that higher ed professionals get wrong about competence in the workplace?
Probably a lot of things. I think the biggest one is that competence in your area of expertise means that you are going to be competent in a lot of other areas automatically. We promote the people who are really good in their subject areas, not necessarily the people who are really good at peopling. And the peopling is what we really need them to do when they're leaders.
So, one of the things that I have noticed is sometimes certain institutional environments seem to be fostering or breeding a sense of imposter syndrome more than others. And I'm wondering, is it always the person who is quote unquote at fault, or are there systemic issues? Is it both? And where do you draw the line, and how do you determine whether or not it is a systemic or institutional issue more than it is a personal issue?
Well, the answer is all of those things. It is a personal issue. It is also often an institutional, departmental, cultural problem. We know from the research that people who have minoritized identities are far more likely to experience imposter feelings at various parts of their careers. And the reason for that is that for the most part, culturally, at least in the United States, our workplaces are designed to be friendly to straight white men who have partners at home doing childcare, elder care, all of those things. And so if you don't fit into that category, it makes sense that you would automatically feel like you don't belong in the work environment. So from a personal perspective, understanding that about yourself and being able to regulate yourself within that understanding is really important. From an organizational perspective, we need to keep working on the cultures within our organizations to make sure that we are creating spaces that are as inclusive for everyone as we possibly can. That is the only way that we are going to get rid of this imposter phenomenon in our culture.
And if you have a client who is in an institution where belonging and inclusion is not front and center in their institutional strategy, what happens? Can you help this client? Is it something where the client may ultimately decide to leave? Where can this possibly go?
Well, our job as coaches is always to support the person, right? We are meeting the person where they are at and we are helping them grow to where they want to go. And so with some folks, that may mean having the conversation with them and helping them surface and be comfortable with the idea that it's time to go. With other people, the conversation might be, how are you going to change your environment? What pressure can you apply in different places to make changes, to make this better for yourself, to make it better for your students, to make it better for your colleagues? And sometimes you start at that institutional conversation and the personal conversation and move into, okay, we tried all of these things and it's not getting better. It's time to go. But really, if you stay focused on your client, they will tell you what direction they need to take it.
What does that look like if you have a client, let's say there could be a faculty member, it could be a department chair, you mentioned that earlier, or maybe an associate dean. So people who are, let's call them lower to middle management, who may not be in a position of power or clout necessarily. What have you seen that works, how they can make maybe some small changes to their environment so that they are more comfortable and they do feel more of a sense of belonging?
So, one of the best things that anyone who has any leadership role can do is to make sure that they are setting up an environment for the people that they supervise that will allow them to be as successful as possible. So, setting really clear expectations for what success means to the people that you are supervising. Oftentimes, those imposter feelings flare up because we have these expectations that we've created for ourselves because we don't understand what we're actually supposed to be doing. And so, if you as the supervisor are intentional about setting those expectations for your folks, it eliminates a lot of that possibility for them to create those imposter feelings and ideas on their own. You can also try to pass that upward. You can say to your supervisor, hey, this is what I understand my role is. This is what I understand that it means to be competent right now. Does this meet your expectation? And then you work with your supervisor to try to even out those differences. And that's the way that you can help yourself or your client avoid that gap of misunderstanding and kind of level set that competence so that you can not be riddled with your imposter feelings.
So open and honest conversation really
Really.
is one of those things that you can do and build those relationships, build these kind of safe relationships with some of the coworkers. AJ, I'm wondering if you could describe maybe two extremes. One being where the imposter monster just runs amok, is completely unchecked, out of control. What does that look like? And then what would it look like if that person has that monster on a tight leash? I know it's never going to go away, but you can still keep it under control. What does this look like in the workplace?
Absolutely. So let's take that expert type as another example, since we've been talking about that a bit. So for an expert, if they are just ragingly imposter feelings all the time, they feel like they have no idea what they're doing, they don't know what their expectations are for success, that person might be going around being like, I know everything. You have to do it exactly my way because I know everything. And I need you to know that I am the expert in all of this. And they're just constantly exerting this control to maintain that expertise because that idea of expertise is what they understand success to look like. And so they will do anything that they can to maintain the appearance and any shred of feeling like they have the expertise in that situation. For someone who maybe doesn't have their monster on a tighter leash, but maybe has a better relationship with their monster, it's not about controlling your monster or shutting them out. It is about understanding them and developing almost a friendship or some kind of neutral relationship with them. So for someone who has that more positive relationship with their monster and they have that expertise type, that's going to look like surrounding themselves with people who are better at things than they are. It's going to look like saying, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let me look into it and get back to you. So you can feel the difference even in me saying it between the nervous system situation of the first person who's just riled up all the time versus the person who understands their own imposter feelings and triggers and is just able to say, you know what? I don't know, and look into it.
So really that requires, and this kind of brings us back a little bit to the institutional or systemic aspect of it, is requires some vulnerability and psychological safeties, right? And not all environments have that, which then brings us back to what you said earlier of how you might be able to create an environment. So it kind of comes circular a little bit. And what I find interesting, and this is one thing I wanted to ask you about, I could see how when you're putting on a show, basically, if your imposter monster is not under control, you're kind of lying to yourself, you're lying to others because you're constantly
Mhm.
putting on the airs of being in control of a situation, of always being in the know. And I could see how this is a tremendous burden on you.
Yes.
People would never admit that, but I think it is. It weighs on you. So the logical conclusion would be that this could really contribute to an already stressful work environment internally and potentially contribute to burnout. Is that
Mhm.
something that you've seen as well?
Absolutely. Yes, I see it with my clients all the time. There's some really cool research on the burnout cycle with imposter syndrome. So, we develop these beliefs about what it means to be competent and what it means to be good at the thing that we are trying to do. And those beliefs can come from inside, they can come from the media, they can come from our parents, they can come from anywhere really. But we have these beliefs. And those beliefs then don't match up with reality. And we fall into this imposter syndrome moment. We feel the imposter syndrome. We overcompensate in whatever way we need to do in order to feel less like an imposter. So for the expert, it is always looking like an expert or over researching. For the perfectionist, it is making sure that every single thing that we do is 110% perfect because we can't bear to make a mistake. Whatever that compensation is, we overcompensate, we overcompensate, we overcompensate, and then we burn out because we're working way too hard. The nasty thing about burning out is that now you're not performing at your best because you're exhausted. And so you go right back up into the top of that cycle where you say, well, this is what it means to be perfect. And I am not meeting those expectations. And so I'm an imposter. And you just go round and round and round in that cycle.
So, how do you break that cycle? Because this leads me naturally to wonder what are some coaching approaches? Walk us through a possible theoretical, hypothetical coaching journey of how you can help a client. And one of the things I'm particularly interested in, you mentioned the nervous system, how you can calm the nervous system, how you can do that kind of work, and how does that fit in and where?
So I typically start work with folks on that understanding competence point. So up here at the top, what does it actually mean to be good at what you are doing? What resources do you have available to help you become more competent if that is actually what you need? Or to better understand what everybody else's expectations are, or what you actually need to be good at this thing that you are trying to do. Once we can start to level set that and help the person remember that that is what is the expectation. And sometimes that's, we build habits with folks all the time, right? You help them put a sticky note, you help them wear a wristband, whatever it is, to help build that habit to remind themselves of what it means to be competent. The imposter monster or the imposter syndrome, the way that it manifests, relaxes really quickly
Hmm.
because that's really where the imposter syndrome comes from. So if you can check that competence, that understanding of what it means to be good, the rest of it starts to fall out. If you have someone who's really deep in burnout, you would do the things that you do with anybody who's really deep in burnout. You check what their habits are. How often are they resting? What does their daily life look like? What do they want their daily life to look like? All of those good coaching things. As far as taking someone through it, typically it's recognizing the trigger that there's that mismatch or that they're feeling like, some people may actually use the word imposter, recognizing that there's that mismatch and then taking them into the traditional coaching arch of analytical. Let's look at what the situation actually is. This is that level setting standpoint. What are the actual expectations? What are you doing on a day-to-day basis? Do you actually have some competencies you need to build? Sometimes that's part of the conversation. And then you take them up to the ideation. What would this look like if it was more comfortable? How can you create a better environment around you for yourself and for others? And then bring them back down into, okay, how are we going to actually move forward? You're going to have the conversation with your supervisor. You're going to review your position description. You're going to review what resources are available to you through the university to upskill if that really is something that needs to happen.
So, coming back to what you said about competence, what does competence mean in that particular role as well? What are the boundaries and the guardrails around that position that those people are in?
Absolutely. And Tim, I want to get back to you also asked about somatics and that
Hmm.
nervous system regulation. So I recently had a conversation with a client who is at a director level at an Ivy League university, and he is in massive transition. He's changing jobs, he's had family things, he's moving states. I mean, all of the transitions. His nervous system is working overtime. And because it's working overtime, he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. And how do I do this? And how do I manage that? And you could just feel that churn in him of that anxiety and the shifting and the changing and the not knowing what to do with it. And so I pointed it out. And he even in that one meeting was like moving around. I was like, are you okay? Because you just look very uncomfortable in your body today. And he said, oh, I am uncomfortable in my body today. And just pointing that out and giving him a moment to reflect on it was huge for him. We often forget to do that reflection back to, you look uncomfortable in your body, or I've noticed whenever you talk about this meeting, your shoulders come up. When you talk about meeting with this faculty person or teaching this class, you look really tense. Oftentimes, helping folks ground in their bodies can really help them have some insights about what's going on with them. So even when I work with folks on their imposter monsters, I will say, where do you feel your monster in your body when you think about them? Is it a
And what do
tight?
people say?
Oh, all sorts of things. I can feel like a tingling in my hands. I feel my
Oh.
shoulders get tight. I feel a warm feeling or a cold feeling in the center of my chest. All sorts of stress related responses. And then you take them through. Okay, so let's talk about what would it feel like if that was better? Let's have an interaction with your monster and start to make that friendlier. Okay, now what does that feel like in your body? And often what happens is that as we start to work with those monsters, those stress feelings in their bodies relax.
It's a great reminder for the coaches in our audience that coaching is not just about what clients say,
Mhm.
but also about their body language, about the
Mhm.
nonverbal cues that they give us and clues that they give us. And this is a perfect example where when you sense that somebody's fidgety, doesn't seem to be, you said, comfortable in their body. I love that analogy, and I may steal that if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Um, Again, it's important to keep that in mind. And it seems like being under the control of an imposter monster is one of those cases where there are some physical manifestations of that and not just how people think and how people talk. You talked about competence. We started with competence. Let's end with competence.
Okay.
How would you say, what suggestions would you have for coaches to be more competent in helping clients with imposter syndrome? What do they need? What are some of the skills that have come in really useful and really handy to you?
So I think one of the biggest ones actually relates to misconceptions about imposter feelings. And that is that you'll see recommendations online. Well, just have the person make a list of all of their achievements, all the great things they've done. Then they won't feel like an imposter anymore because they'll know that they've done all these things. But the gnarly thing about these imposter feelings is that they also come with this feeling of, I have fooled everyone. It was luck that I got here. So when you have someone list out all of their accomplishments, they're going to go through that list and they're going to say, oh, I just had a good interview day. Oh, we just had a good proposal. And so we got the funding for that project. Oh, I just lucked out because this person left the department and that left a hole and I was able to step in. We have all these excuses. And so really what you're doing when you have them make that list is you're helping them list out all of their excuses for why they must be an imposter. It's actually counterproductive. So when I talk about competence, that is the key to helping people figure out how to overcome these imposter feelings. Not all of these achievements that you have, but what is necessary right now? What did people see in you when they promoted you into that position? They saw that competence or the potential for the competence. So how do we help you level set so that you can be there too? And that's really the key as coaches, is helping them have that conversation.
And if you have a coach who discovers that they're dealing with a client with a severe out of control imposter monster, where can they seek help? Where can they get maybe some information other than, of course, this episode and listening to you and maybe even reaching out to you to help them help that client optimally?
There are lots of fabulous researchers online who talk about imposter syndrome. Obviously, I'm happy to talk to you My work with imposter syndrome, actually, this imposter monsters idea is grounded in something called parts work. And parts work is typically within the domain of therapy, but it is moving more and more into coaching. Parts work is this recognition that we all have different parts of us that show up at different times to serve different functions. So I have a part of me right now, my expert part is driving because I'm doing a podcast interview, right? But my curious part is going to be the one that's driving when I'm in a coaching conversation. My nurturing part is the part that's going to show up when I'm interacting with my children. So we have all these different parts that show up. And learning about parts work and how to interact with someone when they have a part that's showing up, that's driving the train, has been just transformational for me. There are a couple of trainings out there now that talk about using parts work in coaching that are incredible. Coaches Rising in particular has been doing some that are really cool. So definitely check those out if you're interested. And then, of course, all of my resources. I have a book, I've got a training online, and you're welcome to join me for any of those as well.
AJ, listen, this has been absolutely fantastic and super enlightening. For those in our audience who would like to find out a little bit more about you, other than, of course, going to the companion site, which is higheredcoaching.us or leadershipimagined.com/podcast, where can our listeners find you?
So the best place to find me is actually on LinkedIn. I'm there every day. Or you can find me at my coaching website, which is thrivingibis.com. And finally, I am really happy. I will share a link to my training as well as a discount code for your listeners. And we will leave that active through the rest of 2026. So if folks want to check out my training and see how I talk about it and kind of get my workbook and see what kinds of questions I ask folks, that's a great resource for learning more for yourself.
And we put all those links and all these resources that we mentioned on the companion side. Thank you so much, AJ. I really appreciate your wisdom and your expertise, your competence in this matter.
Thanks, Tim.
And your time. And to all our listeners, thank you for spending a little bit of time with us today. As always, if you're interested in more information on this episode, our guests, and the topic, as well as to see all the resources and links that we just mentioned, the website is higheredcoaching.us, or you can go to leadershipimagined.com/podcast. See you again soon. And until then, keep making a difference, one client and one conversation at a time. Take care.